SpiritLife!
Parents, be advised that this is part one of an interview containing a mature subject. Kids, get permission from your parents before watching. This is Bruce on SpiritLife. I'm going to be talking today about human trafficking and sex slavery. To help me do that, I have Benji Nolot, who is an expert in the field of modern-day abolition, and he's the producer of an incredible documentary called Nefarious. He's also the founder of Exodus Cry, which is committed to the abolition of slaves. Thank you so much, Benji, for coming out and talking to me today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you explain what is sex slavery? What is human trafficking?
Yeah, human trafficking is really a euphemism to explain what you described as slavery. And so the way that we think about it, and really the way that we define it, is the exploitation of vulnerability. And so there are cases of human trafficking that are so obvious, where a person has been abducted, been broken down, forced into sex slavery. It's obvious that we say that's human trafficking, that's human slavery. There are other situations, though, where somebody might look at it and say, well, it appears like this person's choosing that, or something to that degree. And so we try to really refine our definition of human trafficking to encompass all people whose vulnerabilities are in some way being exploited. So when we think about human trafficking, we don't just think of the person who's being abducted off the street and forced into some situation. We think about, a person who's living, say for example, in the rural regions of Thailand, who through economic circumstance and through cultural circumstances basically forced into big cities in search of work, where oftentimes they can't get work because they aren't given Thai citizenship, and then are lured into the sex industry through that way. So then we look at it and we say, oh look, this girl's choosing to do this, and it's not so much an issue of her choosing prostitution, but prostitution choosing her. And so what we've seen, we studied and we've investigated the sex industry, we say is mostly made up of trafficking victim, people whose vulnerabilities are being exploited. And there's a whole host of reasons how somebody is made vulnerable, whether it be because of child sexual abuse, whether it be because of poverty, whether it be because of statelessness, or whether it's just, like we said before, because somebody was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so the human trafficking component is exploiting those persons' vulnerability for financial gain, for profit. So this is a supply and demand issue.
How often do you see just the independent woman who's choosing this out of her own volition to be a prostitute versus someone who's actually being exploited behind the scenes?
I don't think I've ever met somebody who has said, I want to become a prostitute, in all reality. If you think about it from the standpoint of a little girl that's growing up, and you think, because I have a daughter right now, and she's 2.5 years old, and every day she wants to dress up in a different outfit, and she wants to be a princess, and she wants to be all these different things, and one day she wants to be whatever her brother's doing. But our girls, our daughters, they don't grow up dreaming about becoming a prostitute, about joining the sex industry, and so you have to start to look at the factors and qualify the factors for, well, what led to that choice. And what we have seen is that universally in prostitution, these girls have primarily all of them have had some kind of a history of sexual abuse that has first of all predisposed them towards this vulnerability, where their identity and their worldview has become shaped around that abuse. Secondly, the average age of entry into prostitution worldwide is 12 or 13 years old. So what we're saying is, how do you qualify the choice of a person who was sexually abused in their home, probably driven out of their home by the time they're 12 or 13 years old, then wound up recruited by a pimp who was telling them all these lies about how great prostitution is. And then we see the prostitute on the street or whatever who says, oh yeah, I chose this and blah, 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 blah. There's a whole history behind that. So I think we have to be intelligent and not be bystanders in terms of our part of looking at this, discerning the injustice of it, and trying to figure out how can we create a solution for this crisis where so many of our sisters, our daughters, our friends women, girls, you know, in our society, in our neighborhoods, in our world today are winding up in places of exploitation in the sex industry.
You touched on this idea of psychological chains. And so in the documentary, it's actually a really eye-opening experience to see that what is so easy to just pass on as, okay, this is just their job, this is what they've chosen, is actually the exploitation of people.
Yeah.
How many slaves are there in the world today?
Yeah. The conservative estimates are between 27 and 30 million. You know, so 20 to 30 million people we're talking about worldwide who are in some form of slavery, whether that be you know, through sexual slavery or that be some form of bonded labor. And this affects predominantly women and children. The vast majority are women and children.
What number of children are involved in this sex industry?
Yeah. If you're talking about in the United States, they estimate that there's about 1 million children that are being exploited in the U.S. UNICEF estimates that every 30 seconds another child is sold in the world today. So there are vast numbers of children who are becoming victims of sexual violence in the world today. Again, we talked about the exploitation of vulnerability. And so when you think about children, you know, you think about people who are already made vulnerable. But then if there's some kind of family instability there where a protective covering or layer has been removed from them, the fact is that we live in a world of social piranhas now that will want to take advantage and exploit that individual. So we went to a place like Thailand where, I mean, you just see this out in the open. Parents selling their children, young children exploited in the sex industry. 800,000 children working in the sex industry in Thailand.
These kind of numbers just are hard for me to even visualize. I mean, I can't really comprehend the vast array of evil that's out there.
Yeah, we're living in an age where there is an assault against our sexuality like never before in human history. And so I feel like it's time for the church to begin to wake up and to begin to talk about these issues, because we have a crisis on our hands and there is a vast human carnage. I mean, 27 million people.
Make sure you check out www.exoduscry.com and get involved. You can click right here in the video for a link to a preview for Nefarious, and if you're on a mobile device, you can definitely also click in the description of the video. I want you guys to check this out and get involved so we can put an end to human trafficking. Click here for part 2 of the interview.
We could end this today if men stopped buying women and children for sex. And so that's really the core issue of how do we end this. It's really on the demand side of the equation. So to answer your question more directly, when you think about pornography and what role pornography has in this, I think pornography is fueling the demand.